In the entire history of the great state of Wisconsin, there have been precisely 4 recall elections for state officials. 4. Now there are about to be at least 4 more. Wisconsinites angry with what Governor Scott Walker and the Republicans did to strip union rights have submitted a lot more than the required number of signatures to get the recall of 4 Republican state senators on the ballot in Wisconsin. Here's where those 4 Republican senators are from. These are their districts. And hey, fun with maps. Watch what happens when we show you those districts in a modern Scott Walker-era Wisconsin political context. You ready? Go. There's already been one statewide election since Scott Walker and the Republicans' union-stripping misadventure, a state Supreme Court election. And in that election, this map shows Wisconsin's mood. The parts of the state that are colored white on this map, people voted the same in this recent election as they did in November. As you can see, that's almost nowhere in the state. The few little red spots you see in Wisconsin, those counties voted more Republican in the most recent election. But the whole big blue swath that is the rest of the state, those places voted more Democratic or way more Democratic than they did before, than they did just past November. That's what Scott Walker and the Republicans' union-stripping adventure did to Wisconsin politics. They made the state vote this much more blue than they did even just 6 months ago in November. And the 4 Republican senators who it now looks like will be facing recall elections, look at where their districts are. You know, if 3 Republicans actually get beaten by Democrats in these recall elections, the Senate in Wisconsin will become a Democratic majority body. It only got as red as it is 6 months ago. But Scott Walker and the Republicans' union stripping thing seems to have fixed all that, and fast. Joining us now is Dante Chinny. He's project director of Patchwork Nation, which is affiliated with PBS. He's also the author of the book, Our Patchwork Nation, The Surprising Truth About the Real America. Mr. Chinny, thanks very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
I know that you are immersed in that data that I just tried to present. I'm a bystander, so let me ask you first if the way I explained that makes sense to you. Was that a fair representation?
Yeah, I'd say for the most part. The one thing I would note, Republicans will say this is a special election and turnout was lower than it would normally be, obviously much lower than it was last November. So you can apply that to those numbers, and we don't really know exactly what it's going to mean when everything comes out the way it comes out in these recalls. But that said, when you look at that map, that's fairly significant, and we're going to find out how significant it was.
Well, we should also note that the last election that this is based on was not technically a partisan election. That these people were not running as representatives of the Republican or Democratic parties. Even with that, they were almost perfect proxies for partisan politics in Wisconsin. One former Republican legislator running as the conservative incumbent, and the challenger supported by all of the people who were mad at Republicans about their union stripping event. Do you think that the special election had a large enough sample size that it could be presumed to be predictive about a general election?
I don't know. I mean, that's honestly what we're going to find out. I think the thing that's most interesting when you look at those numbers, to me anyway, is, and you layer the blue on top of the percentage of people in those places that work in the public sector, there's a pretty good correlation. What I do with this project, with Patchwork Nation, is we break the country into all the counties into 12 different types of place. And there's this one type of place we call service worker centers. The economy has been hit very hard in these places. There are not a lot of jobs in these places. The one place there are a good amount of jobs, the public sector. So what happens when you start hitting these places where the economy's really been hammered already, and you start hitting them in the place where they actually have a good amount of jobs? People get, angry. It doesn't surprise me. Will it carry through fully like that through a recall election? I don't know. But there's definitely, statistically, I don't know if it's maybe we can say there's a perfect correlation or it's going to yield exactly what you think that map shows. But there's something going on here, and it's something we need to look at further. And if I was a Republican and I looked at that map, I'd be a little nervous.
Are there other states where there are a lot of counties with those same qualities that you describe as service worker centers, where this Wisconsin effect might also become visible if political winds blow in the same direction in those other states?
Yeah, and I honestly think if you're a Republican, that's what you have to be most worried about. There are a lot of these service worker centers, and where are they scattered? Well, they're scattered in states that matter, especially in 2012. They're scattered in Wisconsin. Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. These are places that are important. And, you know, it's not to say that all these counties, they tend to vote Republican. They're going to flip and suddenly vote Democratic. But you peel enough votes off in a statewide election, it's going to hurt the GOP in some of these places. Now, what they're hoping, I think, is you go after public sector unions. Maybe, first of all, maybe you feel in terms of policy that's the right thing if you're a Republican. But the other thing maybe you're thinking politically is you can score with these people in wealthy suburban areas who maybe are a little angry at people in public sector unions. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. But what I do think is you go to these places where the employment really is in the public sector, and you tell them we're going to start hitting at your ability to do collective bargaining, they're not going to be happy. And I think that's what we saw in the Supreme Court election. We'll see how it plays out when it actually becomes a bigger thing with a lot more turnout. Are you going to do further drilling down research on this in Wisconsin? Yeah, I really do, because I think that Wisconsin is just the beginning of something. We have speculated for quite some time with Patchwork Nation that these service worker centers are ripe. I mean, you don't want to, we talk a lot about revolutions in American politics. I don't think that's the smartest thing. I think it's more evolution than revolution, and things happen slowly over time. But these places, it looks to us, are if something is ripe to tip, are ripe to tip. George Bush won these counties. There's about 600 of them in the U.S. He won them by about 8% in 2004. John McCain won them by only 4% in 2008. And now that was obviously a major economic crisis, but you take going after these public sector unions and throw that into the equation, you know, maybe it's 2%, maybe it's more even. It's going to affect the game. Dante Chinney, project director of Patchwork Nation.